Please watch the video until the end to feel the full sweep of this love that bridged impossible differences. Chapter 1. The House by the Water. She remembered the first time she saw the house. A pale, solitary rectangle of windows and white clapboard pressed against the glassy throat of the lake. The narrator was the woman who kept the path to the water clear, who swept the porch steps for summer renters, who remembered the angles of the roof and the exact kind of gull that nested on the boathouse. From the bank, she watched lives arrive and depart, but none would carve themselves into her memory like the pair who had come to know the mailbox as a compass. Elena moved into the house in a late spring, carrying only a suitcase and a stack of drawings, plans for small parks, narrow footbridges, places where people might meet without expecting to. She was meticulous, the kind of person whose handwriting revealed the architecture of thought. Clean, assured, lines that resolved into a plan. The house suited her. It had a narrow mailbox by the roadside, an old iron thing with paint flaking like pale fish scales. It had, as the narrator would later tell anyone who listened, a habit of holding onto letters that weren't meant for the day they were dropped in. Chapter 2. Postmark tomorrow. One October evening, after the trees had unstitched their leaves and the lake had learned the language of frost, a letter arrived for the house that would not have belonged to its present occupant. The narrator found it first, a single envelope propped against the mailbox post with neat, unfamiliar script. Inside, a note addressed to Elena, dated 2 years and 6 months into her future. Elena read it with a smile that began like a small mistake and grew into astonishment. The letter was courteous, gracious, the kind of thing a stranger would write before realizing they were reading someone else's life. It contained a paragraph about a painting on the dining room wall she'd yet to hang, a joke about socks lost in the dryer, a request for a favor that could feel intimate because it presupposed familiarity, a familiarity that existed nowhere but on the page. The narrator had watched Elena's face change as if someone were adjusting the focus on a camera trained on her. She saw curiosity become conversation. Elena to the empty porch, Elena to the mailbox, then Elena writing back. Because what else do you do when a stranger seems to know your future? The return letter was cautious, amused, and more than a little afraid. It was addressed to a name that had arrived with the handwriting, Daniel. He belonged, so the letter said, to another year. Chapter 3. Habits of Hearts. Their correspondence settled into a rhythm like tide and moon. They discovered one another by temperament, Elena the planner, Daniel the impulsive. By small domestic facts, he loved coffee black. She burned the first batch of bread she ever made in that kitchen. And by the fact that their notes were the only honest thing they had that did not require explanation. The narrator, whose life had been stitched into the lake's small dramas, kept their secret like a gardener keeps a hidden path. She cleared the way and never stepped into it. She watched Daniel's handwriting blossom on paper that arrived with a stamp from years she could only imagine. She watched Elena illuminate the house with small changes suggested by a man who had become a stranger and an accomplice at once. A thrift store lamp placed just so, a battered chessboard bought at the Saturday market, a photograph taped inside a drawer to comfort a night of rain. Between the lines, they built a life in parallel. They spoke of grief and of the absurdities of office life, of city buses and stray cats, of the way rain sounded on the metal roof. They argued gently about the color of pillows, debated whether a friend should forgive another, shared recipes. They were vivid to each other in ways that made their actual surroundings seem less urgent, more like a stage than a shelter. Chapter 4. The Problem of Time. There was a cost to loving someone who had already learned things you had not yet lived, a cost that calculated itself in absences and in the brittle way plans could break. Daniel once wrote of a job change that would take him away from the city for months, a chance he could not refuse. His letter was sharp with longing. In it he promised to be back for a weekend 2 years hence. Elena's reply was deft, trying to fold hope into practicality. Yet the dates never aligned. They missed anniversaries because an envelope had traveled the wrong way. They ached for shared silences they had no calendar for. One winter, After weeks of interrupted notes and a misunderstanding that left Elena raw with humiliation, she decided to stop writing. The narrator watched the house dim. The lamp on the windowsill burned less often. The chessboard collected dust. The mailbox sat silent, and the narrator felt, keenly and miserably, the absence of words like a cut made to a beloved garment. But the world seemed unwilling to settle the matter. A letter found its way to Elena in February, one that arrived with an apology and a ticket. Daniel's handwriting asking, absurdly, for the narrator's help in arranging a meeting. He had discovered something in his research. An old postmaster's son who believed in certain legends of place, and he thought that if someone could synchronize 2 days, maybe they could meet in one. The narrator knew the rules of the lake. Stories had a way of insisting on their own weather. She also knew how dangerous hope could be when it was shared across time and not held by the same hands. Chapter 5. The Attempt. They tried. Elena and Daniel mapped possibilities as if drawing a bridge across years. The narrator coordinated messages with the meticulousness of an archivist. She left a map folded inside the mailbox. She timed deliveries. She watched for the small signs, footprints in the mud by the dock, the imprint of a bicycle tire on the lane that suggested one of them had come close. There was an evening when the lake held its breath. The sky washed pink, the boathouse shadowed like a secret. Elena stood at the dock with a letter clasped in her hand, and at the same moment Daniel looked across the lake from a shore 2 seasons removed, reading the same words. For a suspended hour they shared the same paragraph, the same joke, the same frame of reference. It felt like a miracle. The narrator had to blink against the feeling as if it might be tears. But a miracle, when measured by calendars, can be fragile. The timing slipped one way, then the other. Plans made with the earnestness of people who loved each other in ink were thwarted by storms, by jobs, by the slow, practical cruelty of life. Still, their letters changed the house and each other. Elena learned to leave her plans behind sometimes. Daniel learned to sketch the future more tenderly. Chapter 6. The House Remembers. Time resolved itself, not in a single grand gesture, but in accumulation. A dozen small compromises, a willingness to be disappointed and come back anyway. The quiet knowledge that letters found one another even when they shouldn't have. On an autumn afternoon years after the first envelope, Elena left the house with a bag and a plan to sell it. She walked to the mailbox to drop a final note into the slot, a letter of thanks more than farewell. The narrator watched the way Elena hesitated, then folded her hands. From the opposite shore, years and decisions later, Daniel came upon a page of his own, a letter tucked beneath a rock at the water's edge like a message in a bottle. He had not known whether they would ever meet. He had kept living as she had, but the lake had kept memory. It had bent days like reeds and had held their word safe. When Elena and Daniel finally arranged to be in the same calendar week, they did not clutch at spectacle. Their meeting was simple. Two people who knew each other's handwriting and the small details of one another's lives, who had spent years practicing how to love from a distance. The narrator, who had been their silent midwife, watched them as they navigated the awkwardness of turning a life made of sentences into a life of days. They laughed at misremembered jokes. They arranged the furniture together. They discovered that love was not a single grand alignment, but a series of refusals to give up. The house held their laughter like a long-stitched seam. The mailbox, painted again and polished, stood by the roadside and no longer needed to bend time to make lovers. People sometimes asked the narrator if what had happened was magic. She would smile and say that the lake remembered what mattered, and that two people who refused to let distance be a reason had rewritten the rules of their own hearts. Please subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, give the video a like, leave a comment, and share this video with someone who loves stories.